All right, let's dive straight into this explainer. Think of yourself as an elite corporate carbon detective today, and your assignment is a massive agricultural conglomerate. I mean, think about the sheer scale of the food and beverage sector for a second. We're talking about global operations that process, trade, distribute, and mill commodities, stuff like grains, sugar, consumable oils, and animal feed. The scale is so incredibly massive, these entities easily rival the energy use of entire small countries. And, with that massive scale comes an equally massive environmental footprint. So today we're going to break down exactly how you track.
It's literally the ultimate puzzle, right? How exactly do you quantify the true environmental footprint of these insanely complex operations? Because when raw agricultural products move from the farm to the processing facility to final distribution, they burn vast amounts of energy and generate serious emissions along the way. Our goal today is to unpack the strict, standardized methods required to calculate this impact accurately. And spoiler alert, we are leaving absolutely no room for greenwashing.
To figure this out, we're going to use this exact blueprint. We'll decode the SASB sustainability standards, calculate Scope 1 emissions, track your fleet's fuel, measure operational energy, and finally wrap up with grid versus renewable energy sources. Let's get into it.
Step 1. Decoding SASB sustainability standards.
So the SASB standards, which are now under the IFRS Foundation, are absolutely crucial. They give us the specific disclosure topics and metrics to help a company report sustainability-related risks that directly hit cash flows and capital costs. Because let's face it, climate regulation and emissions can fundamentally drive up your cost of capital and your operating expenses. If an ag company doesn't have a rock-solid strategy to manage its greenhouse gas emissions, its operational efficiency is at serious risk. These standards, they're the exact measuring stick we need for our investigation.
Moving right along to Section 2, calculating Scope 1 emissions. Now, what's really fascinating here is that Scope 1 looks strictly at your direct emissions, following the GHG protocol. And here is the absolute kicker. It is a gross figure. That means you cannot just subtract purchased carbon offsets to make the numbers look prettier. No way. If your processing facility directly burns fossil fuels, or your operations literally vent gases into the atmosphere, that is your gross global Scope 1 emission. There's no hiding behind credits here. We're looking for the raw, unvarnished number.
As a carbon detective, your primary checklist covers the 7 specific gases covered under the Kyoto Protocol. And it's not just carbon dioxide. You've got to track methane, nitrous oxide, and a whole alphabet soup of fluorocarbons. Each of these gases traps heat in the atmosphere in a totally different way, which obviously presents a huge challenge for our audit. Like, how on earth do we report all of these clearly? Well, to make sense of all these different gases, you have to consolidate them into one unified metric: carbon dioxide equivalents, or CO2e. You do this using the 100-year global warming potential values from the IPCC. Think of it kind of like a currency exchange rate. You're basically converting the value of methane or nitrous oxide into the common currency of carbon dioxide. That way, when you report your final number in metric tons, it accurately reflects your total warming impact in a language that investors and regulators instantly understand.
And when you're setting the boundaries for your audit, your emissions data consolidation has to align perfectly with how your entity consolidates its financial reporting data. This is usually done through what's called the financial control approach. It's actually a brilliant safeguard. You can't just casually carve out a super dirty processing facility from your emissions report if you're actively claiming its profits on your financial balance sheet. The environmental books absolutely must mirror the financial books.
The standard also demands that you lay out your short and long-term plans to actually manage these emissions. It forces a company to build a transparent, step-by-step track record of its reduction targets. You've got to define your base year, specify whether your targets are absolute or intensity-based, which just means emissions per unit of product, and literally detail the mechanisms you're going to use to achieve them. Are you doing process improvements? Switching to alternative fuels? You have to spell out exactly how you're going to hit those numbers.
All right, let's funnel down from the global level. Section 3. Tracking your fleet's fuel. When it comes to your fleet, you have to disclose the total aggregate amount of fuel actually consumed. We're talking real physical usage here, not just design parameters, and you measure it precisely in gigajoules. Also, a crucial distinction, this only applies to vehicles owned or operated by the entity itself. It explicitly excludes fuel burned by third parties hauling your products around. The focus here is strictly on what you control and what you physically burn. Now, if you want to claim a percentage of that fuel is renewable, it has to pass a very strict three-part test. It must originate from renewable biomass, it has to actively replace or reduce fossil fuels, and it needs to prove a net emissions reduction on a life cycle basis. You can't just slap a green label on it and call it a day. You have to disclose the exact standard or regulation you use to prove it's actually renewable. It is all about maintaining absolute integrity in your data.
Okay, let's step out of the vehicles and into the facilities for Section 4, measuring operational energy.
So look at this pie. This captures your total operational energy. And remember, this explicitly excludes the fleet fuel we just talked about. We are talking about the massive, mind-boggling amounts of energy needed to mill grains or process oils during the reporting period. This includes your purchased grid electricity, any power you generate yourself on site, plus all the heating, cooling, and steam required to keep the whole operation running.
To ensure your math is completely bulletproof when measuring the energy from fuels and biofuels, you have to ground your calculations in higher heating values, or HHV. This basically measures the absolute maximum heat released by combusting a fuel. Whether you're dealing with standard fuels or some alternative biomass waste from your own internal processes, using higher heating values ensures every single gigajoule is standardized, converted, and reported consistently across the board.
Finally, we've made it to the bottom of the funnel. Section 5, Grid versus Renewable Energy.
SASB requires a very clear percentage breakdown showing exactly how much of your total operational energy came from the standard grid versus how much was sourced from renewables. This is such a critical metric. Agricultural entities usually rely really heavily on the grid. So, by separating this out, an investor can instantly see how exposed a company might be to volatile fossil fuel prices or stricter future climate regulations.
So what actually counts as renewable? Sources like geothermal, wind, solar, and hydro. Basically, they only count if they replenish faster than they deplete. But pay close attention to biomass here, because ag companies often use crop waste to generate power. Biomass faces intense extra scrutiny. It requires strict third-party certification from organizations like the Forest Stewardship Council to prove it is genuinely sustainable and not just driving deforestation.
And here is a massive audit trap you really need to watch out for. If you generate renewable electricity on-site or through a purchase agreement, you cannot sell the certificates. Renewable energy certificates, or RECs, and guarantees of origin absolutely must be retained and retired on behalf of the entity for you to legitimately claim the clean energy. If you generate solar power, sell the RECs for cash, and then still try to claim that green energy on your audit, yeah, that's double counting. SASB strictly forbids it. If you want to claim it, you got to retire it.
So, as you check off the final boxes on this audit standard, it really leaves us with one lingering provocative thought. When every single gigajoule and metric ton is finally counted and the greenwashing is totally stripped away, what will your company's true impact actually reveal? Because by meticulously tracking those gross Scope 1 direct emissions, isolating your fleet fuel, standardizing operational energy, and rigorously verifying your renewables, you aren't just filing a compliance report. You are opening a completely transparent window into how resilient or vulnerable an agricultural giant truly is in a rapidly changing world.